This flavorful 5-color deck is the ultimate shapeshifter tribal build. Nearly every creature in the deck is a shapeshifter with Changeling. Changeling is a vital feature to the flavor of this deck. There are 12 wastes in the deck that act as placeholders for cards that will be randomly drawn from the maybe board prior to each game. This maybe board is called the Changeling pool, and each card from it enhances one particular tribe, and in some cases more than one. These 12 cards from the Changeling pool provide a litany of tribe-specific abilities. Since nearly every shapeshifter in the deck is every creature type at all times, these cards from the Changeling pool will enhance each of these creatures, optimizing our shapeshifter army as we prepare to win the game via combat. No two games should ever be the same.
Welcome to MTG Burgeoning, your channel for all things Magic. Morophon the Boundless is a 6/6 legendary shapeshifter with Changeling for 7 mana. As Morophon enters the battlefield, choose a creature type. Spells of the chosen type we cast cost WUBRG less to cast. This effect reduces only the amount of colored mana we pay. Other creatures we control of the chosen type get +1/+1. Morophon the Boundless is the ultimate general to helm a tribal deck. So which tribe will Morophon be leading into battle? Every. The following creatures are all shapeshifters, and with the exception of one, they all have Changeling. So as Morophon the Boundless enters the battlefield, it would be beneficial to select shapeshifters as the chosen creature type. That way, we may reap the benefits of reduced mana costs for the following segment of creatures. Leading things off is Amoeboid Changeling. A 1/1 for 1 and a blue, we can turn Amoeboid Changeling sideways to have target creature gain all creature types until end of turn, or to lose all creature types until end of turn. As we further progress with this deck tech, you'll see the offensive purposes and defensive purposes of including Amoeboid Changeling. Creature number 2, we have Masked Vandal, a 1/3 for 1 and a green. When Masked Vandal ETBs, we may exile a creature from our graveyard, and if we do, we may exile target artifact or enchantment an opponent controls. As you'll see later in this deck tech, the removal is a little light for this type of build, so any kind of removal that we can include with our creatures will be highly prioritized. As a bonus, let's say we all know that bringing an artifact or enchantment back from a graveyard is very, very easy to do in almost every format. Bringing it back from exile, not so much. As mentioned earlier, everyone except for one of the following creatures in this segment of the video have Changeling. This is the one that does not, and it is Metallic Mimic. It is a 2/1 artifact creature for 2 colorless mana, so unfortunately, Morophon the Boundless will not be able to reduce the casting cost of this creature in any way. When Metallic Mimic enters the battlefield, we choose a creature type, and we will be choosing Shapeshifter. Metallic Mimic is the chosen type in addition to its other types, so it becomes Shapeshifter. Each other creature we control of the chosen type will enter the battlefield with an additional +1/+1 counter on it. So having Metallic Mimic in this deck will help to give some +1/+1 counters to our other shapeshifters as a way in which to make them slightly more intimidating. Shapeshifter number 4, we have Shape Sharer, a 1/1 for 1 and a blue. We can pay 2 and a blue mana, and target Shapeshifter becomes a copy of target creature until our next turn. There is a lot to unravel with this creature. Let's start with, we do not have to tap Shapesharer in order to activate its ability, so as long as we have enough mana, we can activate this multiple times each turn. The 2 in the blue will have target Shapeshifter. It doesn't necessarily have to be Shapesharer. And as all of our creatures in this portion of the video are Shapeshifters, we can do that with any one of them. And it's going to last until our next turn. And we can do this at any point in the game because the dreaded do only as a sorcery is not included in the text of Shapesharer. As you see, Shapesharer is going to be one of the most valuable shapeshifters we have in the 99. Next, we have Skeletal Changeling, a 1/1 for 1 and a black. We can pay 1 and a black to regenerate it. That's all. No thrills, no spills, and no other chills with that creature. Next up, we have Unsettled Mariner, a 2/2 for Azorius colors. Whenever we or a permanent we control becomes a target of a spell or an ability an opponent controls, it gets countered unless its controller pays an additional mana. Having this tax could help to make our opponents maybe think twice about spot removing one of our permanents. Next up, and moving up to a CMC of 3, we have Avian Changeling, a 2/2 flyer for 2 and 1 white mana. The evasion is very, very nice. In fact, any shapeshifters that promoted any type of evasion were pretty much auto-includes in this deck. Next up, we have another colorless edition, and this is Bloodline Pretender. It is a 2/2 for 3 mana. When it ETBs, we choose a creature type, which, of course, we're going to choose a shapeshifter. Whenever another creature of the chosen type ETBs under our control, Bloodline Pretender is going to get a +1/+1 counter. I do wish it was similar to Metallic Mimic, and he was able to spread those +1/+1 counters around. Alas, we have to play with the cards that are available for a creature type that, let's just say, is not overwhelmingly powerful. As you'll see moving forward, this deck is built much more for its flavor than its uber competitiveness. Speaking of powerful shapeshifters with Changeling, this one may be the most powerful. We have Mirror Entity. It's a 1/1 for 2 and 1 for 2 and a white mana. We can pay X, and creatures we control become XX and gain all creature types until end of turn. This can cause so many headaches during combat for our opponents. Having Mirror Entity in a shapeshifter deck, this was card number 1 to include. And another thing to remember, outside of any +1/+1 counters or any static +1/+1 boosts, we can always pay 0 to have all of our creatures go 0/0 and head right to the graveyard in order to avoid mass exiling effects or mass control magic spells. Next up, and another shapeshifter with Changeling with evasion, we have Mistwalker, a 1/4 for 2 and a blue mana. It has flying, and for every 1 and a blue mana we pay, Mistwalker, not Miststalker, Mistwalker gets +1/-1 until end of turn. Again, we are favoring the evasion over any creatures that have just vanilla shapeshifter Changeling in their bottom text. Next up, we have Realm Walker, a 2/3 for 2 and a green. When it ETBs, we choose a creature type. Let's be honest, it's going to be Shapeshifter. We may look at the top card of our library anytime, and we may cast creature spells of the chosen type from our library. Realm Walker, in conjunction with Morophon the Boundless, could really lead to a lot of tempo and a lot of ramping out creatures onto the battlefield, which would be very nice as a way in which to out-resource and get ahead of our opponents. Next shapeshifter with Changeling we have is Taurian Mauler, a 2/2 for 2 and a red. Whenever an opponent casts a spell, we may put a +1/+1 counter on Taurian Mauler. I do believe we will put a +1/+1 counter on it every single time. Next to Mirror Entity, Taurian Mauler may be shapeshifter with Changeling number 2 to add in this deck. Next up is Venomous Changeling. It's a 1/3 with Death Touch for 2 and a black mana. It's only a 1/3 for 3, but it does have Death Touch, which could act as a potential combat deterrent for our opponents, because let's be honest, we're going to need a little bit of time to set up our game-ending engine. Moving up to a mana value of 4, this time we have Chameleon Colossus, a 4/4 with protection from black for 2 and 2 green mana. For every 2 and 2 green mana we pay, we can activate Chameleon Colossus's ability and give it +X/+X until end of turn, where X is its power. So the protection from black is very, very nice to avoid any spot removal. It can swing in and not be blocked by black creatures. It can stay back as a defender, and it could block black creatures that are just walking on the ground for days. But let's be honest, in a deck that is lacking a ton of overwhelming power, we're most likely going to turn Chameleon Colossus sideways, pump it up, and hope to hit for some big-time combat damage. Next up, we have Graveshifter, a 2/2 for 3 and a black. When it ETBs, we may return target creature card from our graveyard to our hand. This is a way in which to get a body on the battlefield that we can use to probably, most likely, block down. Plus, it lets us get a creature from our graveyard, because let's face it, folks, we're going to have some creatures in the graveyard. All right, with just a handful of shapeshifters left, we turn to Irregular Cohort, a 2/2 for 2 and 2 white mana. When it ETBs, we create a 2/2 colorless shapeshifter creature token with Changeling. So we get a 2 for 1 out of this spell. It's a mana value of 4, and it's going to produce 2 bodies with power and toughness combined of 4/4, and they're both shapeshifters with Changelings. So Irregular Cohort is very, very flavorful for this deck. Our last CMC of 4 spell is Turtleshell Changeling, a 1/4 for 3 and a blue. We may pay 1 and a blue mana to switch Turtleshell Changeling's power and toughness until end of turn. So this does give us the opportunity to, play around with some combat shenanigans. We could send a 1/4 into combat that might not get blocked and then quick switch it to a 4/1, or we can hang on to Turtleshell Changeling for defensive purposes, block a creature, switch its power and toughness, and maybe take down a creature that might be a lot more imposing than our little shapeshifter here. 2 creatures left in this segment, and they both have a mana value of 5. The first one is mono black, and it is Cairn Wanderer. It's a 4/4 for 4 and a black. As long as a creature card with flying is in a graveyard, make sure you pay attention to the text. As long as a creature card with flying is in a graveyard, it does not have to be our graveyard. Cairn Wandering has flying. The same is true for Fear, First Strike, Double Strike, Death Touch Haste, Landwalk Lifelink, Protection Reach, Trample Shroud, and Vigilance. So we have the potential of having an extremely powerful creature here with Cairn Wanderer, as long as we have some bodies in the graveyard. And our last card for this segment, and the last shapeshifter with Changeling, it is Morit of the Frost. It is a legendary shapeshifter with Changeling for 2, a green, and 2 blue mana. It is a 0/0. However, it enters the battlefield as a copy of a permanent we control, except it's legendary and snow in addition to its other types, and if it's a creature, it enters with 2 additional +1/+1 counters on it, and it has Changeling. Morit of the Frost gives us a great deal of versatility because we don't necessarily have to have it come in as a copy of a creature. And as you'll see later, it may be more advantageous for this to come in as a copy of a different permanent. The following group of cards are our Changeling-specific cards. Because the majority of our shapeshifters have Changeling, meaning they are every creature type at all times, we're going to include a block of cards that allow us to abuse that ability. You'll see what I mean as we get further on through this segment. Most of these cards are going to give us a great advantage over our opponents because we have every single creature type at all times with nearly every one of our shapeshifters. There's also going to be a couple of surprises along the way. So let's begin with an oldie but a very, very goodie. We have Didgeridoo. It's an artifact with a mana cost of 1, and we can pay 3 and take a Minotaur from our hand and put it directly into play as though it were just summoned. Remember, our shapeshifters have Changeling, so they are also Minotaurs. So we can pay 3 mana at any time we can play an instant, and we can pretty much just cast one of our creatures. Next up, with another mana value of 1, we have Cataran Summons. It's 1 black mana at sorcery speed. We search our library for a mercenary card, reveal it, and then put it into our hand. Remember, our Changelings are every creature type, so they are also mercenaries. This will allow us to tutor up a creature, or maybe something different. A nice little way to foreshadow one of our next cards, Shields of Velisvel. It is a tribal instant shapeshifter for 1 white mana, and it has Changeling. So Cataran Summons could seek out the Shields of Velisvel. Because of the tribal instant shapeshifter, it's also a mercenary. So if needed, we could seek out this card from our library. And there's going to be multiple instances of other cards just like this that we could fetch up at any time by casting Caterin Summons. Specific to this instant, creatures target player controls get +0/+1 and gain all creature types until end of turn. As you will see shortly, one of the keystone cards in this deck for the purposes of trying to win is Maskwood Nexus. And Maskwood Nexus is an artifact that gives all creatures we control all creature types. Absent of having that card on the battlefield and under our control, we can cast a temporary Maskwood Nexus in the form of Shields of Velisvel. Having the Maskwood Nexus on the battlefield will allow all of our tribes that are represented in the Changeling pool and in the 99 to all come together. Moving up to a CMC of 2, we have Dragon Tempest. It is 1 and a red enchantment. Whenever a creature with flying enters the battlefield under our control, it gains haste until end of turn. Now, we don't have a ton of flying creatures in this deck, so that first wall of text is not always going to hit. However, the next wall is very, very relevant to what we're doing in this deck. Whenever a dragon enters the battlefield under our control, it deals X damage to any target where X is the number of dragons we control. All of our shapeshifters, they have Changeling, so that means that they are also dragons and will trigger Dragon Tempest's second ability. Staying with a CMC of 2 and for another 1 in a red, we have another tribal instant that's Shapeshifter and Changeling. This time it is Blades of Velisvel. Up to 2 target creatures each get +2/+0 and gain all creature types until end of turn. This will be a card that will be highly coveted if we have at least 2 other creatures on the battlefield and under our control that maybe do not have Changeling. More on that later in this deck tech. Moving up to a CMC of 3, but staying with mono red, we have Volatile Claws. It's 2 in a red at instant speed until end of turn. Creatures we control get +2/+0 and gain all creature types. So this is similar to what Shields of Velisvel does. It gives us a one-time use of a Maskwood Nexus, plus that buffing of +2/+0 can be the difference between winning the game and not. We've talked about it a lot so far, so let's bring it out and talk about it just a little bit more. Maskwood Nexus, the cornerstone of our deck. It is an artifact with a mana value of 4. Creatures we control are every creature type. That means they all have Changeling. The same is true for creature spells we control and creature cards we own that are not on the battlefield. So this pretty much gives every single creature Changeling, whether it's on the battlefield, in our library, in our graveyard, or in our hand. Lastly, we can pay 3 and tap Maskwood Nexus to create a 2/2 blue shapeshifter creature token with Changeling. That is not terrible statistics to utilize this artifact in that way. However, make no mistake, the wall of text preceding this activated ability is really the reason why it's included in this deck and looked upon as the cornerstone of the 99. With all of our shapeshifters with Changeling, absorbing all of the abilities from various creatures from the Changeling pool, Maskwood Nexus ties them all together, hopefully for the purposes of sending our army of Changelings into combat with victory on their minds. All right, a handful of spells remaining, staying with a mana value of 4. We have Peer Pressure. It's a sorcery for 3 and a blue. We choose a creature type, and if we control more creatures of that type than any other player, we gain control of all creatures of that type. This spell causes so much havoc on the battlefield. With numerous shapeshifters with Changeling on the battlefield and under our control, remember, they're all creature types at all the times. So we can look around the battlefield that our opponents have, and we can just spot look and say, well, you know, that looks like a real nice Eldrazi that I'm just going to take. Or, boy, oh boy, that is a very feisty angel. Let's cast Peer Pressure and gain control of it for only a total mana of 4. This spell is one of the most powerful we can include in this deck. Moving up to a CMC of 5, and one of our alternate win conditions that we have included in this deck, it is Liliana's Contract. It is an enchantment for 3 and 2 black. When it ETBs, we draw 4 cards and we lose 4 life. We do not mind losing 4 life. We're in EDH, we begin with 40. Plus drawing 4 cards for this deck. More so than any other decks, this is a deck where we run out of gas pretty quickly because the majority of our shapeshifters with Changeling have very, very reasonable mana costs. So any spell that can come down and put more cards into our hand to keep the gas light unlit for a little longer, well, that's going to be highly prioritized in a build like this. More importantly, however, at the beginning of our upkeep, if we control 4 more demons with different names, we win the game. Remember, all this takes is 4 shapeshifters with Changeling, because they're demons too, and as long as they have different names, Liliana's Contract will give us a victory. And lastly, we have another mana value of 5. It is Reflections of Littjara, 4 and a blue. When it ETBs, we choose a creature type. We will be selecting shapeshifters, and whenever we cast a spell of the chosen type, we copy that spell. So the majority of our shapeshifters that we've already previewed earlier in this deck tech do not have the legendary traits. So we're going to be able to reap the benefit a great deal out of having Reflections of Littjara out on the battlefield and under our control. Pretty much any time that we are able to cast one of our shapeshifters with Changeling, we're going to get 2 of them. The following group of cards are our removal and disruption spells. As noted earlier, we're playing it a little lighter than usual. We have less than 10 removal and disruption spells in this segment. However, as we've seen, we've already had some ways in which to disrupt our opponents with cards that we've already previewed, and that's not going to change moving forward. So the first card we're going to talk about is a perfect, flavorful fit for this deck, and that is Absorb Identity. 1 blue at instant speed, we may return target creature to its owner's hand. We may have shapeshifters we control become copies of that creature until end of turn. Notice the text says return target creature to its owner's hand. It does not say target creature we control. So any creature on the battlefield, as long as it's not legendary, do not target a legendary creature if you so choose to have your shapeshifters become copies of that creature. They will all die except for 1 because of the legend rule. This could win games. We can look upon Absorb Identity as a potential win condition in this deck. Imagine what we could do if we have a powerful creature like Utvara Hellkite on the battlefield, and we have 4 or 5 shapeshifters with Changeling out into play as well. We tap 1 in the blue mana, we cast Absorb Identity, we send that Utvara Hellkite to its owner's hand, and then we have 4 or 5 shapeshifters with Changeling that become copies of Utvara Hellkite. We turn them sideways and create so many 6/6 dragon creature tokens with flying that most likely our opponents are just going to look around the table and say, good game. And that's all for the cost of 2 mana. Next up, we have another tribal instance that's shapeshifter with Changeling. This is Crib Swap, 2 and a white, and we exile target creature. Its controller creates a 1/1 colorless shapeshifter creature token with Changeling. We don't care about that. We're just making sure that we can stay on theme, stay with the flavor, and we can just exile any creature and gift that creature's controller with just a 1/1. This may be one of the most versatile removal spells included in the deck, and one that just fits the flavor perfectly. It is Spit Flame, an instant for 2 and a red. It deals 4 damage to target creature. 4 damage to a creature that's admirable. I mean, it's not going to send every single creature to the graveyard, but it's going to do its fair share of making sure we can keep the battlefield clear of any potential dorks. More importantly, however, is the bottom wall of text. Whenever a dragon enters the battlefield under our control, we may pay a red mana, and if we do, we return Spitflame from our graveyard to our hand. Remember, our shapeshifters have changeling, so they're every creature type, and that means they're also dragons. So if Spit Flame's in our graveyard, and one of our shapeshifters with changeling enters the battlefield, we pay a red mana, and we bring Spit Flame right back to our hand. This could be considered repeatable potential spot removal throughout an entire game at the EDH table. Next up, moving up to a mana value of 4, sorcery speed, we have Whelming Wave, 2 and 2 blue. Return all creatures to their owner's hand, except for krakens, leviathans, octopuses, and serpents. This pretty much sends every single creature to their owner's hands from the battlefield, except for ours. And why is that? Well, as we continue to hammer the point home, our shapeshifters have changeling, which means they are also krakens, leviathans, octopuses, and serpents, and they'll stay on the battlefield after we cast Whelming Wave. Next up, we have Widespread Brutality, another sorcery, this one for 1, a black, and 2 red mana. We get to amass 2, and then the army we amass deals damage equal to its power to each non-army creature. Okay, so let's unpack this for a moment. Remember, our shapeshifters have changeling, so they are also armies. So we're going to put 2 +1/+1 counters on one of those shapeshifters with changeling, and then whatever the power is of that changeling is going to deal to every single non-army creature. All of our shapeshifters with changeling are armies, so they're going to remain intact on the battlefield. It's highly unlikely that we're going to come across any other army creatures on the battlefield. So casting Widespread Brutality, if we can target one of our shapeshifters with changeling that is big enough, putting 2 +1/+1 counters on it, that could wipe the board, but just not ours. Moving up to a CMC of 5, we have Crux of Fate, sorcery, 3 and 2 black. It's a modal spell that reads destroy all dragon creatures or destroy all non-dragon creatures. We're most likely not ever going to choose destroy all dragon creatures outside of the scenario of having no creatures in play and staring down a platoon of winged beasts. If that does happen, then please, by all means, cast Crux of Fate, name dragons, and send those guys to the graveyard. More often, however, we're going to select destroy all non-dragon creatures because, once more, our shapeshifters have changeling, so they're dragons as well. They will not be affected by casting Crux of Fate. The following 2 removal spells are unlike the previous 6 because each of them are not on flavor. We need to include a couple of non-flavor spells just for the purposes of remaining slightly competitive in the game. As more and more sets of Magic cards are released, we will be looking to see if we can replace either one of these 2 spells with something more thematic to what we've got tied to the flavor of this deck. For the purposes of where we are right now, however, the second last non-flavor removal spell in this segment of the video is Austere Command. It is a sorcery for 4 and 2 whites. It has 4 modes, and we pick 2 of them. Destroy all artifacts, destroy all enchantments, destroy all creatures with CMC 3 or less, or destroy all creatures with CMC 4 or greater. This will be most likely dependent on board state and where the game is at the moment you choose to cast Austere Command. And lastly, what we said about Austere Command will also apply to Blasphemous Act. It is a sorcery for 8 and 1 red mana, but we will never cast this spell for 8 and 1 red mana because the spell's mana cost is reduced by 1 colorless for each creature on the battlefield. This is EDH, so it's very, very likely that we'll be casting this removal spell for 1 red mana, and when we do, it will deal 13 damage to each creature. Again, this does not have any ties to the flavor or the thematic focus of this deck. We can consider Blasphemous Act, similar to Austere Command, as placeholders for something that might come along that fits into the 99 a bit more flavorfully. The following group of spells we're going to refer to as our miscellaneous spells. They're going to help us reinforce, enhance, and strengthen what we've already showcased in this deck tech, and hopefully pull everything together so that we can integrate the deck as a way in which to focus victory during combat. One of the ways in which we're going to do that is by including some spells that are going to help us seek out specific cards in our library for the purposes of fortifying our Changeling army. One of those cards is Crop Rotation, a green instant for 1 green, and as an additional cost to cast this spell, we sacrifice a land. We search our library for a land and put that card onto the battlefield and then shuffle our library. We are targeting 1 land with this spell and 1 land alone. And for spoilers' sake, it's going to be the World Tree. Next up, we have a copy of Regrowth. It's 1 and a green at sorcery speed. We return any card from our graveyard to our hand. No other exciting things to talk about with this spell. It's great for bringing any card from our graveyard to our hand. It's only 1 and a green. It is the graveyard version of Demonic Tutor. Speaking of which, we are including a copy of Demonic Tutor. Sorcery speed, 1 and a black, the greatest tutor in our format. We search our library for a card and put it into our hand. This will help us to seek out the World Tree. This will help us to seek out Maskwood Nexus. Those are the 2 cards. That's 1A and 1B in order to have this deck perform at its absolute greatest ability. Next card up, it is a tutor somewhat, but we're not bringing it to our hand. We're putting it right onto the battlefield, and that's going to be Wargate. It's a sorcery for X, green, 1, and blue. I'm sorry, X, green, white, and blue. So X and Bant colors. We search our library for a permanent card with mana cost X or less, and put it into play, and then we shuffle our library. So if we're looking to get the World Tree, we're only paying a green, white, and blue mana and putting that land right into play. And then if we want to get the Maskwood Nexus, of course, X is going to end up being 4. Either way, Wargate is included as ways in which to ensure we get each of those 2 pieces of very important cards for our combo. Next up, moving up to a CMC of 4, we have Guardian Project. It is an enchantment for 3 and a green mana. Whenever a non-token creature enters a battlefield under our control, if it doesn't have the same name as another creature we control or a creature card in our graveyard, we get to draw a card. So this is EDH, and we're not playing one of the Persistent Petitioner or Rat decks, so we can pretty much figure that Guardian Project says whenever a non-creature enters a battlefield under your control, draw a card. This was an enchantment that was perfectly sculpted for our format. Yes, it does not really hit too much on the flavor. However, putting cards in our hand is very, very important because, as we said earlier during this deck tech, the Changeling deck has a way in which to run out of gas pretty quickly because the casting costs of our Changelings are so relatively cheap. Any way that we can put more cards in our hand, cards equal power. Speaking of cards equaling power, Stinging Study is included in this deck. It's an instant for 4 and a black. We draw X cards. We lose X life, where X is the mana value of a commander we own on the battlefield or in the command zone. Morophon has a CMC of 7. So for the purposes of this deck, we're going to pay 5 mana. We're going to draw 7 cards. We're going to lose 7 life. 7 life is nothing to turn our nose up at because we begin with 40. And let's face it, 7 life is more than 1/6 of our starting life total. However, to get an entire fistful of cards, as long as we're not dabbling too low near potential lethal damage, we can cast Stinging Study with confidence, knowing that we're going to get an entire hand of cards. Next up, staying with a CMC of 5, staying with a mana value of 4 and a black, but going to sorcery, we have Coveted Prize. However, even though it's 4 and a black, this spell will cost 1 less to cast for each creature in our party. Our party consists of up to 1 each of Cleric, Rogue, Warrior, and Wizard. Do you know what our shapeshifters with Changelings are? They are Clerics, they are Rogues, they are Warriors, and they are Wizards. However, One shapeshifter with Changeling cannot represent all four party members. We need to have 4 different shapeshifters with Changeling in order to bring this spell's mana cost down to 1 black mana. And if we do, we can search our library for a card for just 1 black mana and put it into our hand and then shuffle our library. If we have a full party, we may cast that spell with converted mana cost 4 or less from our hand without paying its mana cost. Best case scenario, we cast this for 1 black mana, seek out either Maskwood Nexus or the World Tree, and get that right into play, all for just 1 black mana. For each party member we have at less than 4, we're going to add a colorless mana to casting that spell, and we will not be able to cast the spell for free, or put the card into play if we're looking at getting the World Tree. All right, next up, may cast a spell. Okay, so we were not. All right, let's bring that back for a moment because I think I made a mistake with this card. So it says we may cast a spell with converted mana cost 4 or less, so we cannot put the World Tree into play. I'm going to correct that right now. I'm not going to go back and reshoot this segment. This is only for a spell, so we could still bring the World Tree into our hand, but we cannot get it onto the battlefield through Coveted Prizes ability. All right, so we got that straightened out. That could have been a bad one. All right, the last spell for this segment of the deck tech, we have Patriarch's Bidding. 3 and double black at sorcery speed. Each player chooses a creature type, and then each player returns all creature cards of a chosen type this way from their graveyard to play. Just be cautious when casting this spell, because if you are sitting at an EDH table with other tribal players, you want to make sure what's in their graveyards, and you want to make sure it's not going to be more powerful or detrimental to cast Patriarch's Bidding for us than it is for our opponents. As this deck tech nears its conclusion, this is the segment of video dedicated to our mana rocks and our land base. And what better way to start than by showcasing the best artifact in the format, Sol Ring. You know what it is, you know what it does, you know it's card number 1 when we're talking about mana rocks. Perhaps mana rock 1B, particularly in a build like this, is going to be Arcane Signet. It's 2 mana to cast, but it's going to turn sideways for 1 mana of any color because Morophon is a 5-color commander. Next up, we have Thelwar Stone. Okay, so we got an artifact that costs 2 that we can tap and add to our mana pool 1 mana of any color that a land an opponent controls could produce. It's highly unlikely that we're going to sit down to an EDH table and square off against multiple colorless decks. So we should confidently think that we're going to get multiple colors out of Thelwar Stone, which for the purposes of this 5-color deck is going to serve us very well. Next mana rock we have is Altar of the Pantheon. This one's going to match the flavor that we crave for this deck. It costs us 3, and our devotion to each color and each combination of colors is increased by 1. However, this is a devotionless deck. We have nothing to do with devotion in the 99 of this deck. So more importantly, we're going to tap this to add 1 mana of any color. And if we control a god, a demigod, or a legendary enchantment, we will gain incidental life. Remember, our shapeshifters with Changeling are gods, and they're demigods, so the incidental life gain will be very helpful when we consider some of the spells that we've already reviewed in this deck tech, particularly Stinging Study. Next up, staying with a mana value of 3, we have another rock. It is Dragon's Hoard. It costs 3, and whenever a dragon enters the battlefield under our control, we put a gold counter on this artifact. Again, every one of our shapeshifters with Changeling, they're dragons too. We can tap to remove a gold counter and draw a card. Amazing power for the purposes of this deck. We can also tap this to add 1 mana of any color. So similar to Altar of the Pantheon, we're getting 1 mana of any color at a mana value of 3, but we're also getting the bonus of getting gold counters, which we can turn into drawing cards. And our last mana rock, and it's one that's going to really help out our Changeling crew, It is the Great Henge, 7 and 2 green, but we're never going to cast the spell for 9 mana because the spell costs X less to cast, where X is the greatest power among creatures we control. We can tap this artifact for 2 green mana and we gain 2 life, another benefit of having the incidental life gain. Whenever a non-token creature enters a battlefield under our control, we put a +1/+1 counter on it and draw a card. The Great Henge does it all, and for the purposes of this deck, it is exceedingly helpful. It's going to give us life gain, it's going to give us cards, it's going to make our rather small changelings a little bit bigger. All right, those are the mana rocks. Now we're going to talk about the installation of the land base. We have a true singleton deck in this 5-color build. That means that there are no 2 cards that have the same name. With that being said, we are going to play with just 1 copy each of the basic lands. 1 plains, 1 island, 1 swamp, 1 mountain, and 1 forest. Now, I understand the temptation may be very strong to just eschew the basic lands and have as many non-basic lands to fix our mana as possible. That could potentially be short-sighted. Keep in mind, spells like Path to Exile, Assassin's Trophy, and Field of Ruin help to put basic lands onto the battlefield as long as you've got them in the 99 of your deck. Don't be the player who's sitting there without any basic lands in their deck when one of your permanents gets Assassin Trophied. All right, next up we have the full complement of triomes. All 5 are here: the Indatha, the Rogran, the Zagoth, the Savai, and the Ketria. These are 5 lands that are very, very fetchable. Each one taps for 1 of 3 different colors of mana. Speaking of tapping for different colors of mana, we are going to play with the full complement of shock lands. All 10 of them are here. They're all right here, the first 5 allied colored ones, and now the 5 enemy colors. All 10 are here. They come into play tapped unless you pay 2 life. So 5 basics, 5 triomes, 10 shock lands for a total of 20 fetchable lands. And yes, we are saying fetchable because we're going to play with the full complement of fetch lands. We've got all 10 of them here, the 5 allied colors and the 5 enemy colors. So getting these fetch lands into play, we prioritize the triomes first because they can give us any one of 3 different colors of mana. So that gives us 30 lands, 5 basics, 5 triomes, 10 shocks, and 10 fetches. We are left with 6 lands, 4 of which are going to really help with the colors, 2 of which are included for their utility and flavor. So let's begin with the best land in our format. It's going to be Command Tower. It's just going to give us 1 mana of any color because our commander has all 5 colors in its color identity. Next up, we have Path of Ancestry. Now, this enters the battlefield tapped, and I generally avoid lands that come into play tapped unless the benefits outweigh the risks. And specific to what we're trying to do in this deck, I believe that the risks are not as high as the potential benefits. We're going to tap this for 1 mana of any color because Morophon is all 5 colors. If we use that mana to cast a creature spell that shares a creature type with our commander, we're going to scry 1. Since Morophon also has Changeling, Morophon is every single creature type at all times. So as long as we're using that mana to cast a creature spell, it's going to match Morophon's creature type, and we are always going to scry 1. This will help us to filter the top of our library and hopefully set up better draws each time we scry. Next up, we have Reflecting Pool. We tap to add 1 mana to our mana pool of any type that a land we control could produce. So if we have Command Tower in play, if we have Path of Ancestry in play, heck, if we have 2 triomes in play that cover all 5 colors, of mana, then Reflecting Pool is going to act as Command Tower number 2. And our last non-basic land that is in here for our color, we talked about it a lot already. It is the World Tree. The World Tree enters the battlefield tapped, but we do not care. We can tap this land for a green mana. As long as we control 6 or more lands we control become command towers. They're going to add 1 mana of any color. That is going to be inordinately helpful for us to utilize the World Tree's game ending ability, which is pay double Wooburg, which is 2 white, 2 blue, 2 black, 2 red, 2 green, tap the World Tree and sacrifice it, and then we search our library for any number of God cards and put them onto the battlefield, then shuffle our library. So the World Tree, absent a mass changeling ability, similar to what the Maskwood Nexus does, this will empty from our library every one of our shapeshifters with changeling and any gods that we have. However, in conjunction with the Maskwood Nexus, if we utilize the World Tree's activated ability and sacrifice it, we're going to pull every single creature card from our library and put them right onto the battlefield. When we do that, we make sure that we have multiple haste enablers, and we swing in for game-ending combat. The World Tree Maskwood Nexus, those are the focal points and the ultimate win condition of this deck, and the reasons why we included so many ways to find and get these 2 cards on the battlefield or in our hands. That leaves us with 2 lands left to talk about. Next, we have the Mutavault. This gives us no colored mana. It taps for a colorless. However, we can pay 1 mana, and we can turn Mutavault into a 2/2 creature with all creature types until end of turn, and it's still a land. So we can use the utility of Mutavault and the flavor of turning it into a changeling and have it gain all of the abilities and what we're exactly trying to do by winning through combat. This is an addition of flavor in a deck that is already saturated with it. And our last land number 36, it is Swarmyard. It doesn't give us colored mana, it gives us a colorless, but more importantly, and the reason why we've included it in the deck, it is its utility of flavor. We can tap this to regenerate target insect, bat, spider, or squirrel. Our shapeshifters with changeling, they are insects, rats, spiders, and squirrels. So we have the ability to perform some combat shenanigans by having Swarmyard on the battlefield and under our control. There we have it, folks. We have our 36 lands. We have our 1 commander and the deck tech. However, the deck tech is not complete. We are 12 cards short. So what are we going to do to fill these 12 spots in the deck tech? Let's find out. The Changeling pool currently consists of 78 cards. Each one of these cards represents one of Magic's tribes, and in some instances, more than one. At the beginning of each game, you will take randomly, if you so choose to be super flavorful, you will randomly select 12 cards from the Changeling pool to shuffle into the 99 of this deck. There are 12 placeholders in place for these 12 cards from the Changeling pool. The goal here is to facilitate the most unique, flavorful play experiences for a deck that wants to represent every creature type in the history of Magic. Here are the 78 cards in the Changeling pool and the tribe that they represent. Abashan, Cephalid Emperor, Cephalids. Altar of the Goyf, Lurgoyfs. Atla Palani, Nest Tender, Eggs. Itagatog, Atogs. Aurochs Herd, Aurochs. Avenger of Zendikar, Plants. Ayula, Queen Among Bears, Bears. Balthor the Stout, Barbarians. Biogenic Ooze, Oozes. Blood Speaker, Demons. Blight Mound, Pests. Calamity Bearer, Giants. Captivating Vampire, Vampires. Cataran Slaver, Mercenaries. Crested Sunmare, Horses. Daru Warchief, Soldiers. Death Baron, Skeletons. Emil the Blessed, Unicorns. Izuri, Renegade Leader, Elves. Feline Sovereign, Cats. Gallia of the Endless Dance, Satyrs. Gargos Vicious Watcher, Hydras. General Kudro of Dranith, Humans. Great Bodoyan, Archers. Gilt-Leaf Archdruid, Druids. Jisath, Sun's Avatar, Dinosaurs. Goblin Chieftain, Goblins. Grist, the Hungertide, Insects. Godo, Bandit Warlord, Samurai. Harmonious Archon, Archons. Hoffrey, Ghostforge, Spirits. Hythonia the Cruel, Gorgons. Kahira the Orphan Guard, Nightmares. Kavu Monarch, Kavu. Kazul Warlord, Allies. Korvath Brightflame, Knights. Kithkin Mourncaller, Kithkin. Lothless Dragon Queen, Dragons. Lyn Civi, Defiant Hero, Rebels. Lord of the Unreal, Illusions. Lyra Dawnbringer, Angels. Magda, Brazen Outlaw, Dwarves. Malcolm, Keen-Eyed Navigator, Pirates. Maronar, Rats. Master Trinketeer, Servos. Midnight Entourage, Etherborn. Mir Galvanizer, Mir. Najila the Blade Blossom, Warriors. Ora, Skyclave Hierophant, Clerics. Pack Leader, Dogs. Patron of the Moon, Moonfolk. Ferris Band Warchief, Centaurs. Rakdos the Showstopper, Imps. The Reaper King, Scarecrows. Riptide Shapeshifter, Shapeshifters. Risen Reef, Elementals. Rot Widow Pack, Spiders. Sachi, Daughter of Sashiro, Shamans. Sage of Fables, Wizards. Scarblade Elite, Assassins. Scion of Una, Fairies. Sea Hunter, Merfolk. Serpent of Yawning Depths, Krakens. Sashiro the Anointed, Snakes. Skeletal Vampire, Bats. Skemfar Avenger, Berserkers. Slimefoot the Stowaway, Saprolings. Soul Catcher's Airy, Birds. Spawning Kraken, Serpents. Spore Crown Thallid, Fungi. Squirrel Sovereign, Squirrels. Synapse Sliver, Slivers. Tulsimer Friend to Wolves, Wolves. Tovalar Dire Overlord, Werewolves. Thing in the Ice, Horrors. Timber Protector, Treefolk. Undead Warrior, Zombies. Unish Cryosphinx Sovereign, Sphinxes. Wall of Mulch, Walls. Wing Splicer, Golems. Wirewood Savage, Beasts. Yuriko the Tiger Shadow, Ninjas. And lastly, Zareth San the Trickster, Rogues. And there you have the 78 card Changeling pool. Again, these creatures represent the very best of each one of their tribes. As you can see from the long litany of abilities and effects, any 12 of these shuffled into the 99 of this Shapeshifter with Changeling deck should result in some power. And once we activate the World Tree in conjunction with the Maskwood Nexus, seeking out these 12 creatures in addition to every other Shapeshifter with Changeling in our deck, that should result in a game-ending conclusion. Here you have it, MTG BC, Morophon the Boundless, Shapeshifters with Changeling, and the Changeling pool. Let me know your thoughts about this deck and the Changeling pool in the comments section below. Do you believe any member of the Changeling pool tribe shouldn't be there? Do you think we overlooked a member of the tribe that should? You can also let me know your thoughts about the Changeling pool and its participants in the comment section below. This is MTG Burgeoning, your channel for all things Magic.